The film opens with a wide shot of a quiet workshop filled with miniature models, setting a tone of meticulous detail and foreboding. The camera slowly zooms into a dollhouse that seamlessly transitions into the real house of the Graham family, a metaphor for their lack of control over their fates. At the funeral, Annie Graham delivers a tense eulogy for her recently deceased mother, Ellen Lee, who was a secretive and controlling figure in Annie's life. Annie describes Ellen as having private rituals and unbearable hardships. Strange faces are visible among the attendees, including people who seem overly focused or have subtle, unsettling smiles. Annie's son Peter and husband Steve appear detached from the funeral proceedings, while her daughter Charlie exhibits odd behavior, doodling during the service and munching on a chocolate bar. The Graham family is introduced in their daily lives, and their fractured relationships become clear. Annie is a miniatures artist working on a gallery exhibit. Her craft reflects her need for control. Steve tries to maintain normalcy but struggles with Annie's strained mental state. Charlie, who was particularly close to Ellen, behaves bizarrely. She cuts off a dead bird's head with scissors and later builds a strange toy out of it. Peter, the teenage son, is a quiet and reserved high schooler who often distances himself from his family, preferring the company of friends. Charlie frequently talks about her grandmother, showing signs of being deeply influenced by her. The sense of unease grows as Annie reveals in therapy that her family has a history of severe mental illness, including her father's psychosis and her brother's suicide, who claim their mother was trying to put people inside him. Peter is forced to take Charlie to a party after Annie insists. Charlie reluctantly goes but doesn't fit in. She eats cake containing nuts, triggering her severe allergy. Panicking, she struggles to breathe and runs to Peter, who rushes her to the hospital in his car. On the way, Charlie sticks her head out of the window to get air. Peter swerves to avoid a deer carcass, and Charlie's head strikes a telephone pole, instantly decapitating her. The sound of the impact is horrifying, and the scene lingers on Peter's frozen, horrified expression as he realizes what has happened. In shock, Peter drives home and leaves Charlie's headless body in the car. He silently goes to bed. The next morning, Annie discovers the body and lets out a blood-curdling scream. The camera shows Charlie's decapitated head on the roadside, crawling with ants. The Graham family descends into grief. Annie isolates herself, creating grotesque dioramas of Charlie's death scene. Steve becomes increasingly concerned but struggles to confront Annie, who is visibly unraveling. Peter is racked with guilt, haunted by flashbacks and hallucinations of Charlie. Annie reluctantly attends a grief support group where she meets Joan, a kind older woman who also lost a loved one. Joan becomes a source of comfort and later introduces Annie to the concept of seances to contact the dead. Tensions rise between Annie and Peter, with Annie blaming him for Charlie's death and Peter resenting her coldness. In one chilling moment, Annie sleepwalks and admits to Peter that she once tried to set him and herself on fire. Joan convinces Annie to perform a seance to contact Charlie. In a disturbing scene, Annie brings the family together to summon Charlie's spirit. At first, small supernatural occurrences, like moving objects, convince Annie that Charlie is present. However, the seance quickly spirals out of control as Annie becomes possessed by an unseen force, speaking in Charlie's voice and terrifying Peter and Steve. Paranormal activity escalates in the house. Annie begins to see visions of Charlie and Ellen, while Peter hears clicking sounds, a habit of Charlie's, and sees shadowy figures at night. Steve becomes increasingly skeptical and worried about Annie's mental state. Annie discovers Joan's true motives. She finds photos of Joan and Ellen together, revealing their connection to a cult that worships Paimon, one of the 8 kings of hell. The cult seeks to summon Paimon into a male host, and Ellen had groomed Charlie as the intended vessel. She also discovers strange symbols etched around the house and realizes they are part of the summoning ritual. Peter experiences horrifying visions at school, including seeing his reflection smiling back at him. He also feels an invisible force choking him. His mental state deteriorates as he becomes increasingly paranoid. Annie becomes fully consumed by the cult's influence. In the film's most grotesque and terrifying sequence, Annie discovers Ellen's decapitated corpse in the attic. Annie's husband, Steve, is burned alive in a gruesome, supernatural event. Annie, now possessed or controlled by Paimon, chases Peter through the house. In one shocking scene, Annie floats in the air and beheads herself with a piano wire while Peter watches in horror. Blood sprays everywhere, and the sound of the wire cutting through bone is sickening. Peter, unable to cope, jumps out of the attic window. His lifeless body lies on the ground as a glowing orb, Paimon's spirit, enters him. Peter awakens and is guided into a treehouse, where the cult gathers around Ellen's and Annie's headless corpses, posed in prayer. Joan places a crown on Peter's head and proclaims him as the new host for Paimon. Joan, hail. Paimon! The cult chants in unison, and the camera zooms out to reveal the treehouse as part of a miniature model symbolizing the family's lack of agency. The screen fades to black, leaving the viewer in stunned silence. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support makes a huge difference and keeps us motivated to create more content like this. Thank you for watching.